All right. Chain of Command Part 2. Okay, so in Chain of Command Part 1, it was mostly just a setup for having Picard get captured and so he could be tortured by Cardassians. Which, that's a famous scene, but I mean, it's in part famous because they actually had Patrick Stewart naked for the scene, which not necessarily ideal, but whatever. Anyways, the interesting thing about this, though, is that there's actually several things in here that, as a GM, if you want to do that, okay, fine, but you genuinely have no reason to bother with them. And certain other plot devices that, while usable ideas, aren't something that you actually have a need to attempt to use unless you're actually writing something that is like fully copying this plot. Anyway, though, so we start shortly after Picard has been captured and has met Guls Madred. And this jumps right into one of the things about this episode that's so interesting. Is that, and this is one of those things that as a GM doing a TTRPG, you would probably want to have the role of Picard being played by a NPC. However, that also means that the players have no direct involvement with most of the events. So you would need to come up with some method to give the players information about what's going on. And that's a bit of a challenge. There's multiple ways you could do it. I mean, if it's an enemy who's doing ransom demands, they could send people videos of the torture sessions and communicate that way to let people know what's going on. But, having someone actually play as Picard would probably not work very well. I mean, sure, if you feel like that would be a good idea, you could, but anyway, so this episode goes pretty heavy into lore building because it starts talking about things that just have never come up before. Like the first Hibitian civilization. Yeah, see, here's the thing. Hibitian is the older name for the Cardassians. Yeah, at some point in the past, the Cardassians had a cultural revolution akin to the Sundering on Vulcan, where, in the case of the Vulcans, their society split in two, and part of it went to Romulus and part of it stayed on Vulcan. Well, in the case of Cardassians, the Cultural Revolution caused them to change from whatever they were before to the way they are now, including referring to themselves as a species by a new name. They used to be called Hibitians. Now they are called Cardassians. No, the TV show just never explains the exact significance of any of this. However, this gets brought up by Madred because Madred apparently somehow knows that Picard has a fondness for archaeology. So Madred starts talking about Cardassian archaeology and how ancient relics from this time period are sometimes found in excavations of areas that hadn't been previously excavated, and that, Cardassia has actually sold a lot of these ancient relics off-world to get money. Interesting. It says a lot about how Cardassian civilization prioritizes comfort over safety. Yeah, they'd rather go with the safety thing. Anyway, though, um, that aspect of Cardassian society and the entire significance of Jevonite is eh, interesting to say the least. Anyway, though, noteworthy about Jevonite is that their utilization of Jevonite in this episode makes it seem very similar to jade, in that it's a decorative piece of stone. It's not some like weird super element or anything like that. It's just a decorative material. Nothing special, except it looks pretty. And doesn't really say anything at all about where Jevonite comes from, other than people mined it on Cardassia to make uh, decorative items out of. Anyway, another thing that they get along to is the whole Seldonis 4 convention thing. This is the only episode where that is ever mentioned, and the only signatories that have been ever identified as being part of the Seldonis 4 convention are the Cardassians and the United Federation of Planets. Yeah, outside this episode, that might as well not exist. It's never brought up in any episode, as far as I know. Which, of course, means that it's entirely possible that the Seldonis 4 Convention is actually part of the Federation Cardassian Peace Treaty, and not actually a broader, more widespread convention. Also, because one thing that gets brought up several times is that the Federation signed a peace treaty saying that they would never develop cloaking devices. Yeah, that was something that's a specific treaty with the Romulan Star Empire. It's not a treaty that the Federation has as a broad scale spectrum agreement. It's just a specific clause in their treaty with the Romulan Star Empire. And we don't even know why they signed that treaty. That actually never came up. Anyway, back to the Seldonis 4 thing. This actually, we do have a hint as to why it exists. Governing the treatment of prisoners of war. As I mentioned before, the only known signatories are the Cardassians and the UFP, so that would seemingly have to do with prisoners of the Federation Cardassian War from back before the Federation and the Cardassians signed the peace treaty that defined as of the beginning of TNG, status quo between the Federation and the Cardassians. A status quo which has not drastically changed as of the point of this episode. They are still in a tense standoff where they're trying to leverage options, and the Cardassians have been rather aggressive in exploiting everything that the treaty gave them, and that comes up in several other episodes. Is that the peace treaty between the Federation and the Cardassians wasn't exactly a smooth one. The fallout of that peace treaty, as messy as it was, actually didn't get resolved by the time of Star Trek Voyager. Yeah, it was that weird, because the Federation Cardassian peace accords, which is not necessarily a single treaty. We don't really know exactly what they signed, and the Seldonis 4 convention might be an aspect of the peace arrangements that the Federation made with the Cardassians, and not necessarily the treaty that ended the Federation Cardassian War, but something that was related to it in some way. Anyways, so what would you do with this in a story? Making up a peace treaty that feels like it is plausible? Why not? Let's face it, most of the peace treaties mentioned in Star Trek are not things that actually had any in-universe development. The one preventing the Federation from developing cloaking technology is one of the most often cited because of the fact that the Federation and the Romulan Star Empire do not actually go to war with each other at any point in TNG or DS9 or even Voyager. Which means that that specific treaty banning the Federation from developing and using cloaking technology is one of the longest lasting that the Federation has had discussed on screen. Granted, a lot of treaties presumably exist. It's just that most of them don't get named or talked about in episodes. Anyway, so the last Convention. We don't have the specifics of the Federation Cardassian treaties. This is part of it. It gets thrown out when Picard is griping to his captor Guls Madred about how he's being treated, and like, you're not supposed to torture people. It's like, oh yes, but you see, I don't care. Also, the fact that this is phrased as treatment of prisoners of war, while the Cardassians and the Federation are not actually at war with each other, and that given the circumstances, it would be legally defensible to claim that Picard is not a prisoner of war. And I mean, yes, obviously he's a prisoner. It's whether it's a prisoner of war that's the question here. Yeah, that comes up in real world discussions a lot too. It's like locking someone up in jail for violating the law is one thing. Locking them up in jail because they're your enemy in a war is completely different. And this was apparently being treated by the Cardassians as the first one. Now, this is one of those things that a lot of people would treat it as nitpicky and, tomato thing. It does actually have a meaningful distinction, though, because of the fact that the nature of the reason why you are being a prisoner has to do with the motive of them for capturing you as a prisoner. So the reason why you're a prisoner is also going to be important when it comes time to negotiate your release. Obviously, because Picard is a main character, they do eventually negotiate his release. It's just that it, takes a few days. Anyways, moving on. So, another thing that comes up is that the whole thing with weird exotic particle stuff, like long range planet wiping superweapon, using Keltris to simulate having a Death Star laser kind of super weapon. Yeah, apparently the Cardassians were actually trying to lure Picard specifically. Which, yeah, that would explain why Guls Madred pulled up all of the archaeology stuff and actually had a knife made with a Jevonite handle as a prop that he could use when talking to Picard. Because Madred was actually trying to lure Picard specifically to Keltris 3. No, the episode does not actually explain why. See, Madred is trying to get Picard to give him information about the defenses of Minos Corva so that the Cardassian fleet, commanded by the other one, Lemec. Yeah, the Cardassian fleet commanded by Guls Lemec is planning to invade Minos Corva, but they want to know what Minos Corva's system defenses are before they do their surprise attack. Also, the Federation had already guessed that they're going to attack Minos Corva, so it's not exactly going to be a surprise attack. However, if Lemec knows what the system defenses are, he could avoid them and thus maximize his advantage. Thing is, as we find out in the episode, Picard doesn't know. Yeah, Picard doesn't know. Why the Cardassians felt that Picard would be likely to be able to give them the information, I have no idea. I don't know that the episode ever actually goes into that. But yeah, they did that elaborate trap to lure Picard to Keltris 3 so that they could take him prisoner and interrogate him for information. And they're asking him for information he doesn't have. Obviously, from an out-of-universe perspective, this episode was intentionally written to have Picard be the one get captured by Cardassians. They did not establish a properly developed motive for the Cardassians to want Picard. And they established in the episode that Minos Corva is one of the disputed planets in Federation territory because the Cardassians... Well, here, you can read it yourself here. The Cardassians and the Federation's treaty has specific provisions establishing the border, and the Cardassians are trying to say that part of what is the edge of Federation space along the neutral zone should actually be considered Cardassian territory somehow. Yeah, I don't know exactly why. Obviously, there is what you have here on the screen about it, but it's not very well explained in the episode. They just kind of mention that it is a thing, and that Minos Corva is in fact part of the territory that the Cardassians wanted to have when they signed the peace treaty and don't have because of the nature of the treaty. Whether or not this was a misunderstanding or something whatever, yeah, I don't actually know for certain why Minos Corva is in Federation space. Whatever. Anyway, if you want to use Minos Corva or the McAllister C5 Nebula, have fun with that. If it fits your story, it's fertile ground for use in a TTRPG. Right? It's not one of the most what's the best way to put this? Interesting things, because it's one of those things that it comes up like in this episode, and as you can see, this is a very, very short wiki article about the McAllister C5 Nebula. That is because the fact that yeah, it doesn't come back. Nope. Same with Minos Corva. It's that it is mentioned in other episodes as existing. Like these here. This is Strange New Worlds. They don't, and in Strange New Worlds, it's literally on screen, on shown on a map, and nothing more. Why exactly this system is important? Good luck with that. I don't know. Anyway, moving on. So, that is just all stuff that's from Act 1, but the later acts really don't cover any new material. Like, Act 1 sets the stage, and everything else after that is, except for the weird personal drama with Jellicoe, uh, there's not really a whole lot of B plot. Like, you have a moment where you get to meet Guls Madred's daughter, who is this girl by the name of Jill Aura. Now, this is something that's interesting because it's been pointed out in several episodes that however Cardassian names are done, Cardassians have multi-part names, and it's not necessarily a family name and a personal name, it's just two personal names, apparently. Like, um, Garrick in Deep Space Nine. His father's name is Enabrantane. Garrick's name is neither of those things. And in this case, you have Madred and his daughter Jill Aura, which, doesn't have any part of her father's name. Why? I don't know. It's one of those things that makes Cardassian culture somewhat different from others. And this does talk about the whole like militarization of Cardassian culture, and that militarization is apparently part of what's made the change from being the Habitians to the Cardassians a meaningful enough change that they changed the name of their race completely. Which again, uh, as I said earlier, it's similar to the way that the Romulans and the Vulcans use a different name for their race because, you know, they have different cultural values. Well, in the case of the Cardassians, though, it's like the entire race just changed from one to the other. Uh, there isn't really a whole lot of evidence given because this isn't the whole like first Habitian civilization thing. It's only talked about in this one episode. It never comes up in any other episodes. So we don't really know a whole lot about it. And it's possible that it was a cataclysmic war where the majority of the population of the planet got killed off, but it's not really well known. Anyways, though, the rest of this episode is okay. You have the annoying idiocy between Data and Riker. Data temporarily becomes the first officer on board the Enterprise and wears an appropriate uniform. Why exactly Jellicoe has such an antagonistic relationship with Riker really isn't explained. Because he antagonizes the other ship's officers, but not to the same extent he antagonizes Riker. And I don't think they ever actually properly explain why that great an extent on Riker. Anyways, um Because of the fact that the crew of the Enterprise is able to deduce that there's a Cardassian fleet hiding in the McAllister C5 Nebula, they mine it so that the fleet cannot invade Federation space without taking damage from mines while still inside the McAllister C5 Nebula. And thus, the Cardassians are forced to surrender, well, not surrender, but jettison their ship's phaser coils so that they would be unable to fight, and then go back to Cardassian space. And this is the one time you actually see Guls Lemec go to Keltris, because until this point, there's no evidence to indicate that Lemec even knows where Picard is. But that's solely because the fact that Lemec's job is being the captain of the Rector and leader of the invasion fleet, and he's not actually in charge of doing anything with Picard. Oh yeah, that reminds me. One thing that is worth noting, something that's difficult to notice in many appearances of the Cardassians, but something that you can see right here. These Cardassian uniforms, so this breastplate here is supposed to be made out of a durable metal, so that, if a Klingon was to hack into it with a bat'leth, the bat'leth would just bounce off the metal breastplate. Well, it has writing on it. What this writing is, I don't know. You might be able to look it up, but given that these are supposed to be military uniforms, it's entirely possible that this is the rank and name of the individual wearing the uniform. But, it is definitely Cardassian writing, so it's there to indicate something. Although, given real-world military things that they use as insignia on uniforms, rank, name, the unit an individual is associated with, whether it's true or false, given the Cardassians, like, hey, they might put on the wrong unit patch just to screw with people. You know what? It works. All fun stuff you can do if you're writing them in TTRPG. And that's about it, because, after Jellicoe and the crew of the Enterprise managed to prevent the Cardassians from invading, the Cardassians are forced by the threat to detonate the mines prematurely, because the Federation crew has actually managed to detect the locations of the ships in the nebula and somehow place mines in the nebula so that they can damage the ships even if the ships don't move from their current locations. Which, given the nature of the McAllister C5 Nebula, would be catastrophic, because staying within that nebula is hazardous to the health of your ship, even on a good day. Having your ship get damaged by a mine while inside that would be utterly, devastating. You're getting blown up by a mine isn't a good thing in general. Getting blown up by a mine while inside a giant space hazard is worse. Oh yeah, and this is another amusing thing. While Jellicoe is captain, he decides that Troy should wear a proper medical uniform whenever she's on the bridge. Hilariously, this was apparently something Marina Sirtis thought was a good thing to do, and not actually something that Marina Sirtis objected to. They just used Jellicoe being captain of the ship as an excuse to have her do it. Well. Anyway, though, and we're about done here. This is one of those things where the episode was originally written as a single one-part episode, but it was so complicated that they realized that it would be actually cheaper in the grand scheme of things if they shot it as a two-part episode, because the fact that then they get to use the budget of two episodes for it, and instead of trying to compress everything into a 1 hour time slot and still having to do a whole bunch of filming with multiple ships, multiple sets, and all that stuff. Anyways, so in the end, Jellicoe goes back to the Cairo. Picard goes back to being captain of the Enterprise, and we're done. As a TTRPG thing, like I said before, your players are probably going to be the crew of the Enterprise, trying to figure out how to do stuff to make, well, one, does your crew even know who Madred is? That's a thing in the episode, is that Picard was the only member of the crew who saw Madred. And I don't even think that the actual main crew talks to Madred at all. They talk to Lemec on the Rector. They don't talk to Madred. Lemec acts as an intermediary in the final part because Lemec negotiates the terms related to the end of the invasion, and then, personally goes to Keltris to pick up Picard, and then take Picard to the Enterprise. Now, this is something that's particularly interesting because Keltris is presumably several light years away from the McAllister C5 Nebula. It's close to the border, but it's not like right next door to the C5 Nebula. It's a little ways away. So that presumably takes a while, but yeah. Anyway, yeah, so like I said, there's a whole bunch of things you could play with in this. Trying to do this as is would be a nightmare. That's the simplest way I can think of to put this. It's like, I would not want to have one of the players being Picard and the other players being the bridge crew. That just feels like something that wouldn't make for a particularly good game. You'd have the players as the bridge crew, and the bridge crew trying to rescue an NPC. That, I think, would be the best way to try to do a story like this. But of course, that means you don't get the first-person perspective of Picard. But again, trying to do that in a TTRPG would just be a bad idea. Great TV. TTRPG, not so much. So this is one of those episodes that I genuinely think would need massive reworking to actually work as a TTRPG episode. Also, I still don't get what the heck was up with Jellicoe and Riker. It's like Jellicoe was trying to get Riker to do something that never happened, and we never find out what Jellicoe's logic was. It's just not, the logic doesn't exist. Whatever. I suspect that was just one of those things that the writers threw in because they wanted more drama, and just couldn't think of a better way to add drama to the story. And also to kill time, because again, this was originally written as a 1 hour episode and expanded to 2. It's possible that the Riker stuff got added when they expanded it, because that does feel like the sort of thing that they'd throw in as filler and fluff. Although you could also do things like having lore dumps, examining the history of the Cardassians and the Federation. That's another thing that I think they probably added to the episode when they increased the length from 1 episode to 2, is that complicated stuff about the Habitian civilization and why the Cardassians are different from the way they used to be and stuff like that. They still didn't explain why Minos Corvus so important, but because that is actually one of those things that we find out about Minos Corva is that it's not a population center for the Federation. Like they've had it as territory for a long time, but it's not something that has a dense population. It actually has a mostly uninhabited Class M planet in it, which is something that I could see the Cardassians as wanting to rectify that uninhabited aspect of the Class M planet. But it doesn't really tell us a whole lot about why the Federation has it as Federation territory and so on and so forth, because again, even the Federation has reasons for having things declared as their territory. They don't just arbitrarily draw lines on a map and say this is ours without giving an explanation of why. Again, presumably reasons exist. We don't know what those are. And with that, yeah, I think I'm done here. It's a very interesting episode for many reasons, and it throws a lot of stuff on the table. Like the entire logic of the entire scenario is like the Cardassians made up a super weapon experiment to lure Picard into Cardassian territory so they could capture him. Oh, I have to say that the idea of tricking your players into taking a bait like that does appeal to me because of the fact that a lot of players would take the bait without even asking twice. A lot of them would hate you after you did it, but that's after the fact. And with that, I'm going to say see you later.